Welcome visitor, my name is Degwin and I'm pleased to author you 6th part of the WoW Player's Diary. My hunter finally reached the long-awaited level 70 while questing in Netherstorm. This milestone happened in early November, just 2 weeks before Wrath of the Lich King was released. The very first thing I did after hitting the level cap was buying a flying mount. I purchased the White Griffon from Windhammer Stronghold in Shadow Moon Valley. Sure, it was only the slow 60s speed increase version, a real sky slow poke, but it was mine flying mount, nonetheless. Finally, I could take the skies whenever and wherever I wanted. With the level cap achieved, my next goal was gearing up for Karajan raid. Even though it was a Burning Crusade first raid, it remained popular throughout the entire expansion. Casual groups were still forming irregularly even near the end of the expansion. Following my guildmate Whites, I headed to Isle of Keldanas, which was the game's first dedicated daily quest hub. Another source of prairie gear came from Scorch Invasion event. Participating in these zombie attacks allowed me to farm badges, which could then be exchanged for entry-level epic items. Of course, crafting was also an option, and that leads to a funny story. One day in Honor Forge I spotted another player wielding a gun with a truly striking design, the Kyra Balanced Chnorium Destroyer. It looked like something out of science fiction, a weapon seemingly capable of making Burning Legion demons flee in terror. Naturally, I had to have it, so I immediately started farming required materials. I vividly remember battling fire elementals in Nagrand for Primal Fire. That spot, incidentally, remains one of the best farming locations even today. Chnorium ore was a trickier. The bars were expensive on an auction house, but as a miner I kept an eye out for every vein I could find. By the time I hit 70, I had gathered everything I needed. I found a gnome engineer in Iron Forge, well, not from my guild, to craft the gun for me. When I trade window closed, the gun was mine. The evening felt like a massive success. I was finally running around with a real epic purple weapon, not just some blue quest rod like a common gunblade. Here is the catch though. The gun stats weren't perfectly optimized for a PvE hunter. While it provided agility, it boasted a lot more stamina, making it arguably better suited for PvP or maybe even a tank. I didn't grasp these nuances back then, and a truly noob move I even socked it in a yellow gem for intellect. To be fair, mana was a crucial resource for hunters in Burning Crusade, so extra bit probably didn't feel entirely wasted at the time, even if it wasn't the ideal choice. Children of Wrath. Around January 209, I came across an interesting article on the World of Warcraft blog discussing the different generations of players the game had cultivated. The core idea was the WoW 4-year history. Well, at the time, 3 distinct player generations had emerged, tied to the major eras: Classic WoW, often called Vanilla, the Burning Crusade, and the recently launched Wrath of the Lich King. The article highlighted how significantly the game had changed during this period. Class mechanics were overhauled, 2 new races, Blood Elves and Draenei, were introduced, and vast new continents, Outland and Northrend, along with smaller island, expanded the world. Players encountered new dungeons, mounts, storylines, and heroes. The level cap had been raised twice. Blizzard also introduced world events tied to seasonal holidays and major lore moments like opening the Dark Portal or Horde on Alliance expeditions on Northrend. The author argued that players starting their Aether journey then in early 209 would experience a fundamentally different game compared to those who began 3-4 years prior. These newer players would likely never experience legendary vanilla raids like Molten Core or Blackwind Lair during their prime. Finding groups for such outdated content was already difficult, unless perhaps they joined a casual run organized by veteran players. They might skip over 5-man dungeons that were becoming deserted even during the Burning Crusade era. They wouldn't need to explore all an outland, as reaching level 68 and heading to Northrend, the current hub of activity, could often be done by completing only a fraction of Burning Crusade questing content. These newcomers wouldn't know the older systems, the original flight path requiring manual connections between points, or the time when Start Home could be tackled by a 10-player group. They might not even be aware certain classic dungeon existed, bypassed entirely as they rushed towards the Dark Portal upon hitting level 58. When I shared my thoughts on the article with my guildmates, the veterans agreed. The game had changed. Some argued it was almost unrecognizable from its earlier days. Reading this article made me reflect, which generation did I belong to? I began playing before Wrath of the Lich King launched, during the time when reaching level 70 was an ultimate goal and held significant weight. I bought my first riding mount at level 40, back then it cost considerably more before Path 2.4.3 nerf. The achievement system didn't exist yet, and honestly, no one seemed particularly bothered by its absence. I hit level 70 myself just 2 weeks before Wrath of the Lich King release, so technically that placed me in the Burning Crusade generation. However, I never experienced their burning raids like Karajan, Zulaman or Sunwell Plateau, and they were current progression content. Because of this, I couldn't truly consider myself a full-fledged child of the Burning Crusade. This left me feeling more aligned with incoming wave. Perhaps I was one of the first children of Wrath. Ship to the North. I pre-ordered my copy of Wrath of the Lich King expansion from an online store in Kiev. Back then, convenient digital downloads weren't an option. Preloading via the launcher simply didn't exist. It was a different era. You ordered a physical disc, waited for delivery on the release day, installed it from the drive, and only then could you finally play. So, on a launch night, November 13, 208, I waited for my copy while others were already gathering in Stormwind Harbor, watching the first ships departing from Northrend. General chat buzzed with activity, reports from players exploring the new continent, excitement about the newly visible post-70 experience bar, and mentions of leveling already happening in Howling Fjord and Borean Tundra. My disc arrived on an office next day, November 14th. Naturally, I didn't install WoW there. I'd long since stopped putting games on work machines. I waited impatiently until evening and then installed an expansion on my home computer after dinner. The first Northrend zone I ventured into was the Borean Tundra. Even though my server, Moonglade, wasn't heavily populated, Borean Tundra still suffered from significant lag as the launch day wound down. This happened despite Blizzard wisely creating 4 separate entry points to Northrend, 2 for each faction split between the 2 starting zones. It was a clear improvement over the chaotic Burning Crusade launch, where the single Dark Portal entry point created a massive bottleneck, turning Hellfire Peninsula into notorious lag-fest as both factions flooded through it simultaneously. For Wrath of the Lich King, Blizzard split their arrivals. Player could land separately on either Borean Tundra via ship from Stormwind or Howling Fjord via ship from Manatee Harbor, back before the Cataclysm flooded it. Speaking of starting zones, I always preferred Howling Fjord. The atmosphere felt more captivating, with the dense forest, towering cliffs, and Rykill settlements clustered around the imposing Edgarda Keep. Borean Tundra had its own desolate charm, but I found it less appealing overall. More of a flat, sparsely vegetated wasteland. That said, both Northrend zones felt more grounded and aesthetically cohesive than many of Outland's otherworldly landscapes. The art and the environment design in Northrend were outstanding overall. While vanilla WoW had its share of beautiful locations, I personally found Outland art direction somewhat inconsistent. Northrend, however, felt like a significant step forward. Perhaps grounding the expansion in a strong Scandinavian-inspired theme helped to create this more unified and appealing world. rather than trying to piece together disparate fantastical settings like Outland often did. Questing also felt more engaging in Northrend, largely because the quest did a better job of weaving a coherent narrative. It sometimes felt like developers were leading players by the hand, but the result was clearly understanding of the unfolding story. However, a magical technical innovation tied to this storytelling, phasing technology, which changed the world based on quest progress, had significant teething problems. These issues persisted for quite some time, even as late as the Ice-Crowned Citadel Path cycle deepened into expansion. Players in different phases often couldn't see or interact with each other, causing frustration at summoning stones and elsewhere in the world. Despite these technical hitches, other quality-of-life improvements were welcome. The introduction of heirloom items was particularly notable. These account-bound pieces of gear scaled with your character level and could be sent to your alternate characters. Many also provided valuable experience bonuses, making leveling subsequent characters much smoother. The 5-player dungeons format largely followed by the Burning Crusade model. A relatively short, linear path with 3-5 bosses, often grouped in convenient hubs. Ankahed, the Old Kingdoms, was a notable exception, offering more scale and not linearly. Generally, completing one of these dungeons and 1180 early in expansion, patch 3.0x, took about an hour, sometimes less. This accessibility was another step towards catering to a broader player base. However, not all the developers' decisions during this era were met with universal delight. Your content is a joke. One of the Blizzard's most debated decisions during the Wrath of the Lich King era was the reintroduction of Naxxramas. Originally, the pinnacle of raiding difficulty in Vanilla WoW, the scorch-infested necropolis was conquered by only a teeny fraction of players back then. Ironically, Wrath of the Lich King repurposed this once legendary challenge into one of the expansion entry-level raid instances. The accessibility of new era Naxxramas became starkly clear just 3 days after launch. The newly formed guild 25th of November, a merger of allied guilds SK Gaming and Nihilum, had already cleared all the initial raid content. This included the sprawling Naxxramas plus 3 shorter encounters, the World of Akavon, the Eye of Eternity, and the Obsidian Sanctum. While the developers had stated the Wrath of the Lich King first raid tier would be approachable, the sheer speed of this world first clear likely stunned even hardcore raiders. After all, defeating just 4 horsemen encounter in the original Naxxramas took top guilds weeks of progression. Clearing the entire reworked instance along with the other launch raids in a mere 3 days, a time frame that also included leveling characters to the new cap of 80, was astonishing. Of course, clear reasons existed for this rapid progression. The members of 25th of November were jeered in their best items from Burning Crusade Final Raid, Son of a Plateau, and possessed good knowledge of original version of Naxxramas. Leveling speed was also a factor. The world first level 80 player hit the cap by end of the day 1. Top players had better access, allowing them to optimize their leveling routes. This lightning-fast clear fueled the ongoing debate. Was Blizzard casualizing or oversimplifying the game with the launch of the second expansion? I don't fully agree with this perspective. Well, firstly, it wasn't just simplification, it was an expansion of difficulty spectrum, creating more accessible entry points for raiding. Secondly, this trend started long before Wrath of the Lich King. Vanilla WoW introduced 20-player raids, Zul'Gurub Ruins of Ahn'Qirash, as alternatives to the demanding 40-player instances. The Burning Crusade continued this by shifting to 25 10-player formats, shortening dungeons and adding the badge system for obscuring epics outside raids. In Wrath of the Lich King, this philosophy simply became more apparent. Yes, allied guilds blew through the initial content. But for countless other players, Naxxramas served as their first real taste of organized raiding, a crucial training ground. It might have felt easy for veterans in T6 gear, but it was arguably pitched correctly for average player. Many belonged to casual guilds that, even in the Burning Crusade, rarely ventured beyond Karajan. I remember my own guild Vindicators having heated discussions about tackling Zolaman as late as August 208. A guildmate even confident that our guild wasn't equipped for tough raids, and the truly progression-focused guilds were rare on our server. My own journey reflected this more typical, slower pace. I didn't set foot on Naxxramas until mid-April 209, months after launch. Raid progression wasn't my main focus. I leveled steadily but without rushing, averaging about a level per week. I quested through Borean Tundra, Howling Fjord, Dragon Blight, Grizzly Hills, and Sholazar Bazin, also spending time in Zuldrak. Grizzly Hills was probably my favorite zone before hitting the level cap, with the Gundrak areas of Zuldrak a close second. Leveling was also naturally slower because Northrend flying wasn't unlocked until 1177, and even then I was cruising on my thirsty but slow 60 speed White Griffon. Despite my slower leveling, I thoroughly enjoyed the 5-player dungeons. I ran with Gardekeep, one of the first available, on my second evening on Northrend. As I mentioned, I loved the expansion Scandinavian theme, brilliantly excited by the designers there. The Troll dungeons, Dragtharon Keep and Gundrak were also excellently crafted. A particularly memorable instance was the Kalin of Stratholm in the Coven of Time. It let us participate directly in one of the Warcraft's darkest and most pivotal moments, the event that sealed Arthur's Menethil tragic fate and set him on a path of becoming the Lich King.